On September 1st, 1943, at Rabaul Airfield in New Britain, Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai reviewed an intelligence report that prompted him to laugh aloud in the humid operations tent. His one good eye, the other having been lost to American gunners a year earlier, scanned words describing a new American fighter that seemed destined for failure. The Americans had produced a new fighter aircraft that was as heavy as a bomber and as wide as a transport. They had designated it the Hellcat. In Japanese intelligence suggested the aircraft weighed twice as much as the Zero, leading analysts to conclude it represented another American failure of design. Through the tent flaps, Sakai could observe his squadron's A6M-0 fighters lined up on the pierced steel planking. These aircraft were sleek, nimble, and deadly. For 2 years, these fighters had dominated Pacific skies with remarkable effectiveness. British Hurricanes, American P-40s, and Dutch Brewster Buffaloes had all fallen before the Zero's guns. The Americans' latest attempt, this bloated Hellcat, appeared likely to meet the same fate. What Sakai and the other Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing could not have known was that in exactly 30 days this supposed failure would begin the systematic annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat would ultimately achieve a kill ratio of 19-1, destroying 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing only 270 in aerial combat. The aircraft would transform carrier warfare, break the foundation of Japanese air power, and prove that the Zero's reign of supremacy had been built on fatal assumptions. The mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be fundamentally rewritten by an aircraft that appeared wrong in every aspect, flew heavy, and seemed to violate every principle the Japanese had perfected. Yet within 6 months, the very pilots currently dismissing the intelligence reports would be writing final letters home, knowing that encountering Hellcats represented a statistical certainty of death. The rising sun's zenith, mathematical dominance. The Japanese Navy's confidence in September 1943 was not rooted in arrogance, but mathematical reality. Since December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had achieved victory ratios that defied conventional expectations. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses resulted in 103 enemy aircraft destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 losses versus 30. The British Far East Fleet's air arm had been annihilated. The Dutch East Indies Air Force had been eliminated within days. At the center of this dominance flew the Mitsubishi A6M-0, an aircraft that had rewritten the rules of fighter design. When American engineers tested captured examples in 1942, they initially refused to believe the performance figures. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the firepower to destroy anything it caught seemed impossible to achieve. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who would become Japan's ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, described the Zero in his recovered diary with reverence. Flying the Zero felt like wearing wings, he noted. The aircraft responded to thought rather than just control input. American planes flew like trucks, powerful but clumsy. The Americans built fighters the way they built cars, heavy, overbuilt, and wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous performance through revolutionary design philosophy. Extra super duralumin, a classified aluminum alloy, created a structure 30% lighter than comparable American designs. No armor plate protected the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks added weight. Even the radio was often removed to save 30 pounds. Every ounce was sacrificed for performance. The intelligence dismissal. The first reports of the F6F Hellcat reached Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943. The specifications seemed like propaganda, or perhaps deliberate misinformation. The aircraft weighed 12,186 pounds when loaded, while the Zero weighed 5,800 pounds. Its wing area spanned 334 square feet, with a draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specifications at Command Fleet Headquarters. His analysis, preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was dismissive. The Americans had learned nothing, he concluded. This Hellcat represented the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero would fly circles around it, he predicted. The mathematics seemed to support his assessment thoroughly. The Zero's wing loading of 22 pounds per square foot gave it a turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcat's wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a turning radius over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese fighter tactics, the Hellcat would theoretically be helpless.
Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort for a reconnaissance mission when he spotted them. 6 dark blue shapes were climbing from the southeast. His first thought, recorded in his after-action report, was that they were B-25 bombers on a strange heading. Then they turned, and he observed the distinctive silhouette: single engine, massive fuselage, wings that seemed too short for the body. His report noted this as his first encounter with an F6F type fighter. His initial impression was that the Americans had mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber. He engaged using standard tactics. Standard tactics meant using the Zero's superior turn rate to position on the enemy's tail. Fukui rolled into a diving turn, expecting the heavy American fighter to continue straight, allowing him to curve onto its 6 o'clock position. Instead, something unprecedented occurred. The Hellcat refused to run. It refused to turn with him. It went vertical. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, compared to the Zero's Nakajima Sakai of only 1,130 horsepower, drove the Hellcat upward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, attempting to follow, watched his airspeed decay as the Zero struggled against gravity. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat performed a maneuver that should not have been possible for its weight, a hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported. 6 machine guns, not the 4 expected. The volume of fire was unprecedented. His aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did he escape. Fukui survived, barely making it back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes. His wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, did not return. Neither did the reconnaissance plane they were escorting. First blood belonged to the Hellcat. October 5, 1943. The weight paradox at Wake Island. Task Force 14 struck Wake Island on October 5, 1943. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what appeared to be another nuisance raid. American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, usually fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would prove different. Shiga recorded in his diary that they climbed to 20,000 feet. Below them, 12 F6F fighters flew in 3 divisions. The Japanese held every advantage: altitude, position, and surprise. Victory seemed certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine completely.
As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters refused to scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment. The Hellcat's armor included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, and self-sealing tanks that could sustain dozens of hits. As the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in diving passes, the Hellcats executed their counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitudes where the Zero's engines struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower, while the Zero was down to 900 horsepower. Shiga wrote that they came down like hawks on sparrows. Their weight gave them speed the Zeros could not match. They would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before the Zeros could react. 8 Zeros were shot down. No Hellcats were lost. November 11th, 1943. The Prophecy at Rabaul. At Rabaul, on November 11th, 1943, the assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Tanimizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanimizu, with 32 victories, was one of the few pilots who had survived multiple encounters with Hellcats. He instructed them to forget everything they knew about air combat. The Americans had changed the rules entirely. They no longer fought the Japanese fight. They fought like executioners rather than warriors. Tanimizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly and fatally learning. The Hellcat was not designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to attempt such a maneuver. Using a combat doctrine called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no opportunity to use their superior maneuverability. They worked in pairs, Tanimizu continued, one high and one low. While engaging one Hellcat, the other was already diving on the target. Their radios, which the Japanese had laughed at for adding weight, allowed them to coordinate perfectly. Japanese pilots flew as individual samurai. The Americans fought as a machine. December 1943, the technology gulf at Truk Lagoon. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now served as Air Operations Officer for the combined fleet. His inspection of damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats revealed the growing technology gap that December at Truk Lagoon.
The disparity in firepower was purely mathematical. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, totaling 4,500 rounds per minute. Each .5 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. The Zero's 2 7.7 millimeter machine guns fired projectiles weighing 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, delivering only 750 foot-pounds of energy. More disturbing were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots still relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could detect Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception with bewilderment. They were climbing through clouds when the attack came with no warning and no visual contact. Hellcats dove from above, exactly on their heading and perfectly positioned. The Americans knew where they were, their altitude and their course. The Japanese were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark. January 1944, the pilot crisis. The Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic by January 1944. The pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program had been the world's most demanding. Training took 3 years, with pilots entering combat with 700 flight hours.
Army pilots received 500 hours minimum. They were artists of aerial combat, trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of air fighting. By early 1944, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with 300 hours of flight time, Army pilots with 200 hours. Fuel shortages meant most training was conducted in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, and radio procedures were all eliminated to rush pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in type. They had fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, and learned energy tactics in safety over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, training officer at Kasumigaura Naval Air Station, wrote in his final report that they were sending children to fight professionals. He described Ensign Yamamoto arriving at the front having never fired his guns in flight because there was no ammunition for practice. He had never flown at night because there was no fuel for such training. He lasted 7 minutes in his first combat. October 12th to 16th, 1944, the Formosa Revelation. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa during the Battle of Formosa. Over 700 aircraft participated, including the last trained pilots from the Homeland Training Squadrons. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed, was catastrophic. Actual American losses totaled 89 aircraft. Japanese losses reached 329 aircraft and nearly every experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As the Japanese climbed, the Hellcats were above them. As they dove, the Hellcats were below them. They had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division. It was not combat, but systematic extermination. The Japanese Navy committed its reconstituted carrier force to Operation A-Go, the decisive battle that would supposedly destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. 9 carriers and 450 aircraft represented their best remaining pilots. Against them stood Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them F6F Hellcats.
Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would prevail. The first wave of 69 aircraft launched at 0830 hours. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were vectored for interception with perfect positioning. Altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. The Japanese were at 18,000 feet. Every advantage belonged to the Americans. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 were shot down. Commander David McCampbell, CAG of Air Group 15, shot down 7 aircraft in that single day. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, got 6. McCampbell reported that the Zeros tried to turn with them, but the Hellcats simply refused. They would make a high-side run, shoot one down, and zoom climb back to altitude. The Zeros would try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off. By day's end, the Japanese had lost 346 carrier aircraft, plus 50 land-based aircraft. American losses totaled 30 aircraft from all causes. American pilots, in their ready rooms that evening, coined the term turkey shoot. The enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. October 24, 1944. The Leyte Gulf Record.
Commander David McCampbell set his single mission record during the Battle of Leyte Gulf on October 24, 1944. Leading 7 Hellcats from Essex, he intercepted a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. In the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. McCampbell recorded that he ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill. The Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout, sustaining not a single hit despite being outnumbered 8-1. This engagement demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without loss. McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him the Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. The psychological collapse. The aftermath of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf battles produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among surviving pilots. Admiral Ozawa, in his after-action report, wrote that the enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something previously thought impossible, the industrialization of air combat. Each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine. Japanese pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes, but a system. The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots. Kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training. April to June 1945. The Okinawa Apocalypse. During Operation Iceberg, the Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa. The Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a defender against the desperation of suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign. His tactical innovations using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks made traditional Japanese tactics suicidal. Valencia explained that they developed what they called the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. They would make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5 to 1 ratio. More significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of Japanese aircraft from reaching their targets. The technology chasm. By 1945, the technological gap had become unbridgeable. The F6F Hellcat incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection, boosting power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically.
Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944. Despite his skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his first engagement. He wrote in his autobiography that he performed his best aerobatics, loops, rolls, splits, every maneuver he had perfected over 200 combats. The Hellcat followed easily, almost casually. He survived only because the American pilot made an error, forgetting to release his drop tank before combat. The human cost accounting. By war's end, the F6F Hellcat had accomplished remarkable statistics. It destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat while losing 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieving a 19.3 to 1 kill ratio.
It produced 305 U.S. Navy aces and accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories. The human cost for Japan was catastrophic. Of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 15, 1945. The kamikaze equation. The transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations represented the ultimate admission of Hellcat superiority. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles. Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, father of the kamikaze program, justified it with stark mathematics. If a Zero attacked a carrier conventionally, the probability of success was near zero because the Hellcats would destroy it. If the Zero became a bomb, the probability of hitting increased to 30%. The pilot would die either way. At least as a kamikaze, his death had meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats in the process. The next day, October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died as a passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14. Japan's greatest ace, helpless without a fighter, fell to the very aircraft he had briefly bested. August 15, 1945, the final testimony. Following Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast on August 15, 1945, at Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, who had dismissed the Hellcat as weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Around him sat the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with 40 hours of flight time and aircraft cobbled together from spare parts with empty fuel tanks. That same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from USS Belleau Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2 p.m., marking the last aerial victory of World War II. The Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, was approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns ended the Pacific Air War. September 15, 1945, the occupation revelation. The first American aircraft to land at Atsugi Airfield after the surrender were 12 F6F Hellcats from USS Yorktown. Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Vosto, an ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to Japanese pilots. His casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart left them speechless. He told them through an interpreter that they had to understand this was not even pushing the aircraft. In combat with water injection, it was 20% more powerful. The plane was stressed for 13 Gs. He had never managed to break one.